All right. Welcome everybody back to the Finance Essentials podcast. I know your favorite day of the week, right? Wednesdays. Woohoo. All right. Go podcast. I actually was planning on recording yesterday, but I thought maybe today might be a little bit better. As I'm sure most of you are aware, the president election is going on right now. As of right now, I believe Biden is in the lead. But we're not really going to talk about that today because the reality is whoever the president at the time doesn't really matter that much to us. Because one of the things that we talk about on this podcast, as we did in the prior shows, is that you have the responsibility and I have the responsibility to be as successful as possible so we can help those that might not be as fortunate or as blessed as us, right? And if that's the case and that's our goal and that's our target, whoever the president is at the time doesn't really matter. So if you're one of those folks that's sitting there and you've been pining on over this for the last 4 years and you live with politics and that's your life, I hope you get the results that you want, because then maybe if that's the case, then you'll be able to move on, and then we can focus on things that actually move the needle. So if Biden's your guy, congratulations, and if Trump's not your guy, or if Trump is your guy, well, then hopefully you can also focus on things that move the needle. A big shout out, big thank you to everybody. I know we normally start off with a big thank you, but thank you to everybody who tunes into the podcast on a weekly basis, especially those who follow us on social media. Again, we are on all of the social media platforms. One of the other things too that you guys can do to help out, I know normally one of the things I talk about is liking and sharing the show on various platforms, subscribing. Obviously, those are also huge. But if you get the chance, swing by the site on the it's financeessentials.io. There's also a section on there where you can subscribe. You should see it, but you should subscribe. And what it does is it actually allows you to download the Finance Essentials finance cheat sheet. So it's something handy to have to print off. It's got a lot of different formulas, different calculations. It's essentially a cheat sheet that, if you happen to be in college right now, that would probably be super beneficial if you were taking a finance exam. So sign up for it and print it out. If you guys happen to have any feedback, anything else that might be useful, I try to keep it to one page so that way it's easy to print off. But hop over to the website, sign up for it. I think it's super handy, it's super helpful, and it's very relevant for a lot of the topics and discussions that we end up bringing up and talking about on the show. So, on to the meat of the discussion today. What we're going to talk about is market disruption. I know we've talked about it in different areas and different sections before, the big one being when we were talking about college education. This one's going to be a little bit different. It's going to be about the primary school system, and the current system that's in place, and what we're seeing as far as impacts from COVID, and then potentially, again, as we like to try to do, tie it back to a finance-oriented conversation and what it has to do with us. So where we're starting out today, it's an article actually out of Reason by Mr. Corey DeAngelis. And I highly recommend, I always include in the show notes links to the articles that I use. Unfortunately, I was not able to actually take out a lot of the pieces that are actually in this article. It's so well done, but it's also super long, and I did not have the ability. And again, my finance brain kind of wandering here and there, and it flutters off as far as, oh, well, what about this and what about this? So I wasn't able to include all of it. I hit on some key points here, but the overall article was awesome, and I can't recommend it enough. So the title of the article is COVID-19 Didn't Break the Public School System, It Was Already Broken. And so he starts off by saying, we're witnessing an exodus from public schools that's unprecedented in modern U.S. history. Families are fleeing the traditional system and turning to homeschooling, virtual charters, micro schools, and more controversially, pandemic pods, which I'm hopefully other parents and a lot of you guys out there aren't necessarily calling them that. But yeah, those also do exist, in which families band together to help small groups of kids learn at home. The result has been an enormous backlash. A recent New York Times opinion article claims that families forming pods is the latest in school segregation. Denver Public Schools issued a formal statement in August urging parents not to unenroll their children, even though the district is not reopening its schools in person, because it is deeply concerned about the pod's long-term negative implications for public education and social justice. Falls Church City Public Schools in Virginia issued a similar statement the next day, pressuring families not to withdraw their children. Administrators were concerned about pandemic flight and worried that an exodus of students would cause the schools to lose money. Duh. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. If your students aren't going there, then the school shouldn't get your money. And so what I did was I pulled out some fun facts. Well, I guess they're not really fun facts, but I pulled out some facts and some highlights in the article, made some bullet points, and then that'll kind of help lead us into to some of the discussion. So he said that 75% of the nation's 100 largest school districts decided not to open. Which is pretty significant. I mean, if you think about it, right, you're talking about a school district in New York that may potentially have, 2 to 2.5 million kids in a school district. The absolute disruption, as I'm sure if you're a parent and you're listening, that you have also already encountered and have been encountering probably since March or April. The next one is that overall enrollment may drop potentially about 7% or approximately 3.5 million students. So think about the country as far as the amount of students that are enrolled in school, take out about 3.5 million of that, and that could be what the school districts might not be seeing re-enroll. The initial indicators and drivers are the pandemic, obviously. But one of the big driving factors that they found through their surveys was lack of support from the school system. And so when they talked about lack of support from the school system, the big thing that they talked about was teachers being inadequately prepared to teach virtual classes, which makes sense. I mean, I don't know how you teach 20 second graders for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, sitting in front of a computer. I don't know how you can do it. I mean, we have a 4-year-old, and I mean, even when he's watching his shows, which he doesn't get a lot of showtime, screen time, but even when he's watching a show and it's something that he really likes, he'll generally turn it off. And keep in mind, this is something he really likes. He'll generally turn it off at 45-ish minutes, somewhere around in there, because he just kind of gets bored. So I couldn't imagine a teacher trying to teach 20 students for 7 hours a day at that age. Another indicator that they also did was the fact that the materials, the materials aren't properly prepared. A lot of these school systems and school districts are working off of materials that are years old. It's not set up to succeed in a virtual climate, is also a big driving factor. And then overall to communication with the teachers, also to communication with the administrators, with the school district as a whole. So it's really a very antiquated system. And I think COVID is really bringing a lot of that to light. So they go on to say, national polling since March shows approximately 74% of parents are more favorable for homeschooling, whereas 15% is less favorable. I would say for me, it was probably about 2 years or so ago where I was very anti homeschooling. And the big part of it is that I believe kids tend to learn a lot. Now, again, this is just my personal thought. I believe that kids tend to learn a lot from other kids. Whether it's a kid that does this better than this kid, or maybe he knows this better than this kid, or whatever that might be. I feel like they're more inclined to learn a lot of those things from other kids than they potentially would from a parent or maybe a teacher or something along those lines. Because at the end of the day, I remember whenever I was a kid, as far as I was concerned, the grown-ups knew less than anybody else. So why would I want to listen to them? But that kid over there, that kid that I think is pretty cool, and I want him to like me, and I want him to be my friend. If he says something, that sounds good to me. So there was a lot of social learning that I thought was very valuable. But one of the things that I've noticed over the last couple of years is that a lot of homeschool districts and a lot of homeschool areas, they set up a lot of groups. And so you actually have the opportunity as a homeschool parent, or even maybe a pandemic pod parent, to be able to allow those kids that social that social aspect. So they're still able to have the ability to be able to learn socially. And so at that point, then I would have a lot more say, a lot more control, and understanding as far as what they're learning, but then also to who they're learning it from, and so the ability to be able to structure that to what I believe is important, really kind of won me over versus the traditional system. And then there was a survey that was in June that said about 15% of the parents are also very likely to stick with homeschooling. So these are parents where they didn't really have a choice, right? They got thrown into this situation from a pandemic, but they like it. They decided, hey, you know what, we're going to restructure, our lives and stick with this homeschooling. And then they go on to talk about some of the largest impacts. So, for example, Arizona's biggest school district was down about 5.6% in enrollment. I think it was Clark County, Nevada, which I believe is where Vegas is. You feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But they were down about 3.5%. Orange County, Florida, which is where Orlando is, was actually down about 9%. And then there were a couple of other ones too that also had pretty large percentage drops. But the next one I thought it was super interesting. And again, being a finance guy, I'm considering about all the financial aspects of this as they're kind of flowing through and they work its way out in my brain, is the homeschool filings. So, for example, in Nebraska, homeschool filings are up about 21%. Vermont was up about 75%. Wisconsin was up about 128%. Utah, 175%. Arizona, 229%. And Texas, 288%. So, now again, they don't give us hard numbers. And what I mean by that is that if you have 1 and you go to 4, technically you have increased by, 300%. So when it says that Texas went up 288%, the percentage increase is phenomenal, right? That's a massive jump. But what they don't do is they don't provide the actual core numbers themselves, unless I missed it. Maybe I missed it. Maybe it was posted somewhere else in the article. But either way, almost a 300% increase in homeschool filings in Texas is a large number. And if you think back where we were at a couple of minutes ago, where we were talking about how these school districts are looking at these as lost funds, right? These are now amounts of money that these school districts may not actually be getting because of their enrollment. And so what eventually he talks about, and again too, it's a great article. I can't recommend it enough. Is some of the hypothesized drivers and so on and so forth. And then he pulls in some financial numbers, which to me that's where I tend to gravitate towards. And so he spells out in the U.S. we spend approximately $15,000 per student. Now the numbers that I researched, I wasn't able to see 15. Maybe that's a newer number, and so the number that I was looking at was a little bit older. But we're definitely still in the ballpark. And so if you look at it, where you have $15,000 per student, and you take out 3.5 million students from school districts, you're looking at approximately $52 billion in terms of funding. Now, what that says to me, as an entrepreneur, as a business coach, as somebody who is trying to push the envelope and really emphasize with you guys the importance of opportunity, right? The importance of what can we do to control the source of our income, potentially make that income mobile, look for opportunities to where we can better our lives financially. That to me says just in the last several months, there's potentially $52 billion in this system that could potentially be up for grabs. Now, most of this is calculated out through taxes and so on and so forth, but the market is there. I mean, the market in terms of what people want when it comes to schooling and education as far as their students is obviously there. So these parents are seeing it as an opportunity. They're taking their kids out of the school district, and there's an opportunity there, I think, for a lot of businesses. So after reading through the article, there were several areas that my brain went, again, especially from a finance perspective, one of them being, how, if we spend approximately $15,000 per student, how does that rank us versus other countries in the world? And then on top of versus other countries in the world, where does that rank us in terms of performance? Because my head is that that's more money than I would have thought. And just based off of general understanding and general reading that I've done, and probably many of you have read, is that statistically speaking, versus a lot of other countries, we seem to be lagging behind. So what I did was I found an article on Insider, and it breaks it down. So in as of 2015, we spent approximately $13,000 per student. So again, the number I found was slightly lower, but again, we're in the ballpark. And that was in 2015, and we actually spent the second most. So the second most out of any country in the world per student on public education. Now, I see that, and we'll use the 13,000 per student just for conversation's sake. But I look at that and I'm thinking, you can buy a damn good private school or whatever for $13,000 a year. I know a lot of people, and I'm not super versed on the conversation of school vouchers, and so I don't want to speak way outside, but the way I look at it is this: competition is never a bad thing. I don't really think I ever have a problem with competition. But as a parent, if somebody was to say, here's $13,000 for your kid's education, what are you going to do with it? I know that I would look at any possible opportunities to get the kids best education that I could. And if it doesn't end up costing me anything additional out of pocket, I mean, that's crazy. I mean, I don't know why anybody would ever say no to that. So anyway, so $700 billion is what we spend in 2017. And so because $700 billion is such a vast amount of money, it's actually equivalent to the entire GDP of Finland and Vietnam. So you take their entire economy, roll that into one, and that's approximately the United States education budget as of 2015 or in 2017. Now, what are the results? What do we get out of that? Well, according to the same article from Insider, we ranked approximately 38th in math and 24th in science. So not the worst, is the ROI there? From a finance perspective, the return on investment, I would say no. If we're spending second most per student and we're ranked at, we'll just average those together, and it's 31st overall, I would say that the return there is pretty terrible. And then it's even worse when you look at it versus 20 years ago. Versus 20 years ago, we actually ranked 6th. Now, I didn't really dive much deeper than that in terms of why, looking at it over the time period and so on and so forth. So I don't know potentially what are some of those drivers that would take it to go from 6th down to approximately 30th. My guess is that we probably haven't changed much, but other countries have done better. And the reason I say that is, and I don't think my opinion of government at this point is really much of much of an unknown. I just don't think that our system as a whole has been able to innovate. I don't believe that they have been able to focus on areas to improve, so on and so forth. So it's not that I believe that our system has actually gotten worse. I imagine other systems have actually just gotten better, more efficient, more cost effective, so on and so forth. So then the primary driver that we looked at as far as the initial article goes was COVID, right? So, and again, that tends to be one of the main drivers of most of the content on this show at this point, mainly because it's just there, right? It's a part of life at this point. I know some folks, depending upon your political standing, you might say, well, it's a part of life because of X, and then somebody else might say, well, it's a part of life because of Y. Completely irrelevant. That, as far as the conversation goes, it's irrelevant. And so what I wanted to know, though, was obviously with the election, that's taken over everything. You can't really turn on any news, which I wouldn't recommend anybody turning on any news anyway. But any type of research, anything that you're doing these days is really covering the election, and that's about it. So what I wanted to know, because I know several months ago there's been talk of reopenings as far as schools go. What's that status? What are schools that are reopening looking like? are they reopening? What's the case situation looking like? How is that going in terms of being able to reopen schools? So what I found was I found an article from NPR. It was called, Are the Risks of Reopening Schools Exaggerated? So I only took out a short blurb of it, mainly just because of time constraints and stuff. But combined with anecdotal reports from a number of U.S. states where schools are open, as well as crowdsourced dashboards of around 2,000 U.S. schools, medical experts are saying it's time to shift the discussion from risks of opening to the risk of keeping them closed. And so the next part here, it was by Dr. Dooley. I thought was a very telling quote, and really kind of the highlight of the article. Is as a pediatrician, I'm really seeing the negative impacts of these schools closures on children. She's ticked off. She ticked off mental health problems, hunger, obesity due to inactivity, missing routine medical care, and the risk of child abuse, on top of the loss of education. And then she goes on to say, going to school is really vital for children. They get their meals in school, their physical activity, their health care, and their education, of course. Now, the part that really stood out for me is education came last, which I thought that was kind of the purpose of school, but she's a doctor, so, she might have other priorities and things along those lines. I just thought that it was funny that she mentions all of these other topics and then she's like, oh yeah, and education. But what that's telling to me is that at this point, with a lot of the school districts still being closed, and I'm not super familiar with all of the school districts in the country. I know some are opening. It probably depends upon, again, this is mostly driven by the state level. So overall, my guess is a lot of your heavier blue leadership states are probably still going to be more in lockdown. I'm almost certain that California is, and we'll kind of touch on that here in a few minutes. But also your New Yorks, your Minnesotas, your Illinois, mainly your Chicago's and your Virginia, Maryland, Connecticut, Massachusetts, so on and so forth. So most of those guys, I imagine, are probably not opened up. Whereas some of your other ones, I know everybody's been talking about Florida and Governor DeSantis there. Basically, I mean, he's ready for the Dolphins to fill up their stadium, which, to be honest, would not happen anyway. But he's basically saying, go ahead, have a big party. So it will also tend to vary some, from the state level. But what this is saying to me, and I don't think I've made my opinion, again, unknown as far as lockdowns and regarding the impacts of lockdowns. But what this is telling me is that at this point in time, locking down the schools and not allowing kids back in school is causing way more harm than allowing students back into school would be. And that's not even talking about COVID related, right? As the doctor mentioned, all of these other side effects and all of these other things for the kids. And that's just talking about the kids. That's not even talking about the parents. And so to tie that back into the original article, it really helps me to understand, and it really shows me why parents at this point are looking at this as an opportunity to take it upon themselves. As I would encourage most of you guys, if you guys have an idea or something along those lines, or maybe you're even interested in being a teacher or creating a school or an education curriculum or something along those lines, now's the time to do it. Now's the time to do it. The market is there. Parents, I think, are getting fed up with the current circumstances when it comes to schooling. And so one of the other things too that I wanted to understand was why. Why is it that so many people seem to be adamantly opposed to opening up school systems, especially when we talk about the problems? One of the things that I found, it was actually talking about LA County in California, which is the second highest population in terms of school districts for students in the country. And they talked about the teachers union was saying that campuses should stay closed for the start of the school year. And then it goes into kind of, their demands and so on and so forth. But what that says to me is that it doesn't always necessarily correlate with what is actually going on, right? So, a lot of people say, listen to the scientists, listen to this. Even when it looks to when you go that route, there's always going to be an element of politics there, and so what this says to me is that the teachers unions, regardless of what might be going on, if they're not on board with opening up the school districts is not going to open up. And I think that's really leading into parents seeking alternatives in terms of options. So as we always talk about on this conversation, and I know that I have kind of peppered it in as far as the discussion today, what we have the opportunity to do in this type of a scenario was I found an article from Forbes that was actually talking about, and the title of it was COVID-19 Crisis is a Boost to Educational Technology Companies, which I don't think is a surprise. If any of you guys are still having to work from home, you're probably using forms of technology that you never really used before. I know for us, we've implemented Microsoft Teams. And so it basically took the place of WebEx as well as Jabber and a couple of other systems and so on and so forth. I happen to like Teams. A slight little rant though is it won't let me choose my phone as the audio. So whenever I call into a Teams, I actually have to mute my mic and then call in. So that way, if the kids are being noisy or whatever, I can kind of keep the sound on my phone, and I can walk away and it doesn't get a lot of background noise. I'm sure probably somebody listening to the show or watching on YouTube is probably going, no, you just have to do this. If you do this with your microphone, then it's fine. And you just have to adjust this setting and so on and so forth. If you're that person, just message me, just text me, email me, whatever you need to do. If there's a way to fix that, I'm turning to you guys now for IT support. So if you know how to fix it, that's wonderful, and you would actually save me a little bit of a headache, and I probably look a little bit dumb on those phone calls anyway, but that's what I end up doing. And so the idea, the fact that elementary and primary school technology progressing, I don't think comes as a surprise for anybody else either. One of the areas and one of the companies that they actually mentioned in the article was the Khan Academy. So, and the reason why I called them out is because for one, that they're probably the most famous online educator, and then another too is that it's also not for profit, right? So a lot of people, when they talk about education, is that they look at private schools, or they look at for-profit schools, or so on and so forth, and they go, well, our children's education shouldn't be a profit. We could do another discussion on that later. But I mean, I think that's a reasonable perspective. So what I did was they talk specifically about the Khan Academy. It's a not-for-profit, and it was started, and their mission statement is a free world-class education for anyone everywhere, or anyone anywhere. Their courses are for young, they're for old. And Edutopia, which is an educational foundation founded by George Lucas, is also a treasure trove of free information, including social and emotional learning, teacher development, and education research on project learning. So right there are two examples of market disruptors that could potentially make serious inroads into the world of education. One thing that they're looking at, though, too, is they're also looking at more global. They're looking at more broad. They're looking at really, really large scopes. But one of the things, just from doing the research and things on this article, is that I don't think you necessarily even have to go there. For example, maybe you're a great business person, and maybe you have a great network, or maybe you don't have a great network, but maybe you have a great idea. Maybe your idea is, hey, I can set up a school, or I can set up a network where I'm connecting teachers or people who are willing to teach small groups, and which kind of goes back to the what is it? What was the old book? Where the Red Fern Grows, right? And so all of those frontier stories where they had the schoolhouse, and the schoolhouse is where all the kids in the town would go to, and that's where they would learn. And there'd be kids in first grade, and there'd be kids in 8th grade, and everybody kind of learned all at one time, So maybe you have a vision of doing something along those lines, but maybe you're not a teacher, but maybe you know teachers. Maybe it's a scenario where you can sit there and go, all right, well, if we charge, $500 per student per week, approximately, what is that, $2,000 ish a month. Maybe you don't have to go that high, but whatever it might be, we'll just use it for simplicity's sake. $500 a week, and we have 10 students. We have 10 students in there, and so you're making approximately $5,000 per week which, you mean, you multiply that, I mean, you're talking about $20,000 a month, and you're teaching 10 kids. Now, again, all of the curriculum and so on and so forth would be something that you would end up needing to work, but there's so many different programs out there. Again, one of my personal heroes, Ron Paul, he has a a homeschooling curriculum. Now, I don't really have a lot of details on it, but there are a lot of other opportunities, and there are a lot of curriculums and bases that are already set up. And keep in mind, too, a lot of them are already ones who have gotten approval, because most of these are going to require some type of accreditation, so on and so forth, so that way they qualify. But the reason I bring that up is that that's an opportunity, and maybe you don't even need to do it in person. Maybe you do it virtually. Maybe you have the ability to, with your words and the ability to be able to interact with people, where you're able to help tutor. Maybe you create a tutoring business where you're able to teach it to maybe high schoolers or whatever along that it might be, to help teach younger kids and help boost up virtually or things along those lines. And so the only reason I bring that up is because as we continue to strive to put ourselves in better financial situations, we continue to look for opportunities to become more financially independent, not necessarily dependent upon somebody else to solve our problems and to solve our, to help pay our bills, where we go up and we just show up and we do some work and get a paycheck. The opportunity is there. The market disruptions are there. This one specifically is just in education, but we've talked about food service. We've talked about food services as one. I'm going to bring up one about hotels, some of the stuff, the market disruptions that people are starting to kind of see for hotel disruption as well. One of the things that movie theaters are starting to do, and maybe we've talked about this, but if not, they're renting out the whole theater. You can rent out the whole theater for $100. Now, one of the things I think is going to be really cool one day is that if any of you have ever been to the karaoke places where you rent a karaoke room, 10 or 12 of you go into a room, there's a screen there, you sing karaoke, you've got all the words and stuff. I think there might be opportunity there. If massive movie theaters, essentially go out of business, you can have a warehouse, relatively large warehouse where you could fit, 20, 30, 40 screens in, where you just rent them out for a room of 10 to 12 people, and they can watch their own private movie. You can have snack bars, you can have beers, whatever it might be. So the opportunity for market disruptions are there. This one just happens to be for education, mainly because I came across a really good article and I thought it was worth exploring. So again, that's the show today. I really appreciate you guys tuning in every week. I really look forward to all of the feedback that you guys provide, any additional insights, and if you guys happen to have some success stories too, let me know. Let me know if there's something that really popped up. Just to give you guys a heads up, I am wrapping up some of the final touches on the webinar. Should have the webinar wrapped up sometime within the next few days, so that's going to be solid. We're going to get that going in December. I'll send out the link and everything, and I'll let you guys know. Like I mentioned, hop over to the website, financeessentials.io. Sign up, download the cheat sheet. I think it's super helpful. And then also to follow us on social media. Make sure that you don't forget to subscribe and like and leave us some good comments and kinds of things if you want to. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Whatever your side is as far as the election goes, don't beat yourself up too bad. It happens to everybody. And we'll talk to you later. All right. Bye.